Hello class and welcome to Corporate Governance Chapter 2. In this chapter we're going to talk about the politics associated with corporate governance, specifically the board of directors. Let's get started. It's important to note that organizations, particularly at that top management, board of directors, shareholder level, is inherently political. Right? You have three very important entities within the organization which have to all work together, and not always do they have the same motivations, the same desire, the same outcomes, or are after the same thing. So they have to learn to work together, to communicate with each other. While there may be varying interests at play, they have to still work together toward the common goal. So the fact that you have people who are in positions where they're vying for power, where they're vying for influence, where there's money involved, and there's different levels of power and influence, the internal politics that takes place within individuals and within groups is inherent and begins to take place. Now, when you're looking at a board of directors, 97% of the U.S. boards use nominating committees to identify new board members. So there's a couple things I want you to realize. First, people who are on the board of directors are not there forever. I'm talking specifically about your large Fortune 500 companies that are publicly traded. If you're a small business, 1 or 2 employees, maybe less than 10 employees, and you put together a board, your board may not have much influence. And you may have just had a phantom board that's put there so you can have the corporate docs completed, and they take really no action in the organization. So for the purposes of this lecture, in this class, we're really talking about larger corporations, publicly traded companies, lots of employees, and those things. So when we start talking about the nature of the board, bear that in mind. Now, the board members are elected to the board for a certain amount of time. That amount of time can vary. It depends on the time set aside in the corporate documentations when the company was formed or when it was amended later on at some point. The typical time period can range anywhere from 2 years to 8 years, with the most common time frame being around 4 years. So think of it this way for the purpose of our discussion. Once every 4 years, we're going to elect some board members on and off. Now you can imagine that if we were to, let's say we have a committee of 8 people, a board of 8 people, and the 4-year time period has come, and now we're going to remove all the board members and elect a whole new board committee. You can imagine how problematic that would be for a variety of reasons. One, all the intrinsic knowledge that the people on the existing board have acquired that help make them successful and good board members, you lose all of that. Plus, you can have a major shift in ideology and political power and everything else within the board. So organizations do not tend to re-elect the entire board. Instead, they stagger the elections. So we may say, once every 4 years, we're going to elect new committee members. But we're only going to elect 2 committee members at a time. So then every year or every 2 years, you'd have a new election committee coming up as the time began to mature and matriculate. So staggered boards are when only a portion of the board members stand for re-election at a time. The remaining stay on the board to ensure proper strategic continuity. When you're looking at selecting a new board member, there's a lot of criteria that you should be thinking about in terms of who makes a good board member. And this is very critical. I'm not going to go over every point in this list. I recommend you pause the video and read the list in detail for yourself. But I will say that it's important that you find board members who have a backbone, who are willing to stand up to the CEO, to the top management, to other board members, and say their piece. Now, with Fortune 500 companies, typically the people who are on those boards, they're leaders in their own right. So you don't have too much of a problem with people being willing to stand up and say what's necessary, but it's critical. And you can think about this from the inside director's perspective. It's important, even though they may report to the CEO, or the CEO may even have dual designation. And that means that the CEO also operates as a chairman of the board. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that they're willing to stand up and say their opinion. That they're not just a person with no backbone or spine. It's also important to make sure that the people are available to meet, to give advice to management, that they have the skills and experience necessary to advise management. It's important that they understand the issues that the company faces, what industry they're in, the challenges, and that they're bringing something valuable to the table, that they're bringing some type of resource or skill set, knowledge, communication, connections to the company that serve to benefit the company and help it achieve its strategic goals. Approximately 70% of the 70% of the top executives in the United States hold what's called dual designation. As I mentioned just a moment ago, dual designation is when the CEO operates as both the chairman of the board and the CEO of the organization. That thereby makes them essentially the most powerful person within the organization. The chairman of the board is very important and critical because they set the agenda for the board meetings. If there's something that the CEO doesn't want to discuss, he can simply not include it on the agenda, or he has the power to skirt around that to keep that information from getting to other board members or to smack them down if necessary. So when a CEO has dual designation, their power within the organization is virtually unchallenged. If it's just the CEO and then there's a totally separate chairman, then that chairman has they're in a very strong political position to deal with the CEO if they feel the CEO is doing something inappropriate or has gone rogue. In cases where there is dual designation, what you'll find is the board will elect another person. Think of him almost like a second in command, like a Spock to their Captain Kirk, if you will. That person's called a lead director, and they represent the board's interests, even though the board has dual designation. And this is important because you need someone who will speak up when the CEO with dual designation is doing something that may be believed to be inappropriate by the board members or other key individuals. 96% of the companies that actually have dual designation also have a lead director. Here are some trends in corporate governance. One, a lot of companies are splitting the position with dual designation. They're moving away from that. They're moving away from giving one person so much power. There's also increased representation of minorities and women. We still have a long ways to go, but you're starting to see more minorities and women make it to the board positions. Boards are taking increasingly a more active role in strategy development for organizations. They tend to be smaller, more nimble in size, and they're getting involved. Shareholders demand that the board directors and top management, they own significant stock. Why is that? Go back to the lecture where we talked about agency theory and trying to make sure that the board directors and the CEO, top manager, that their interests are personally aligned with the interests of the shareholders. So as the shareholders make more money because the stock price is improved or dividends are paid out, so does the board of directors. Responsibilities of top management. So as a recap, corporate governance refers to the relationship, the interrelating aspects of top management, board of directors, and shareholders. Top management is key. Top management is key because they're the ones, for the most part, are coming up with the strategies. They get them approved by the board if the strategy is significant enough to the entire corporation. But they develop the strategies. They manage the day-to-day operations of the company. They run the company. So that executive leadership is very important. It's important that the top management is able to set a strategic vision for the company. Moreover, it's important that they're able to take and persuade the board of directors to support that vision. To this extent, we look for what's called transformational leaders. I mean, there's multiple leadership styles that we're not going to cover because it's beyond the scope of this class. But one leadership style that's very important, what we call transformational leadership. And this is where you have a very strong leader, a leader who is charismatic. They are persuasive. They're motivating. People want to follow them. They're able to galvanize support. But transformational leaders go a step beyond just being a charismatic leader. They actually focus on the transformation of the people who are following them, the transformation of the people who are their employees. So they're not satisfied with just having great employees, great workers, a great company. No, they actually want the employees themselves to embody the various attributes and characteristics of success. So they invest in education, they invest in training, they invest in focusing on making sure the employee themselves not just drive change, but become the change. Well, that wraps it up for Chapter 2, Board of Directors in Politics. I hope you learned something. Once again, as always, I'll see you later, and don't forget to study.